No, in the same way that there's for post-flop solutions a custom and a pre-solved option to have for preflop solutions, the pre-solved options tend to be something like a web lookup tool, like a browser, more than I guess what you find with post-flop solutions that have more interactivity to them. So I do think that having a browser like a hand lookup, uh, well, a preflop range lookup is a really useful tool and distinct from what we would use, simple preflop or a preflop solver to accomplish. The one that I'm often using in my training videos recently, and what I recommend to a lot of my students, is Preflop Academy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So browser-based would describe, I think, most of these types of tools. I know that Floptimal, for example, is a more recently launched one, and there's a number of, I guess I wouldn't call them preflop tools, but preflop chart packs or purchasable preflop solutions through something like Range Converter or other courses that include preflop ranges. I think these are reasonable ways to source your preflop ranges, but a program like Preflop Academy or Floptimal is going to have just a much larger database attached to a membership, and that membership is going to give you access to all of the different preflop ranges rather than some specific set of preflop ranges for some specific games. So you might have a pricing decision to make when it comes to what preflop ranges are the right purchase for you. But I would use something like Range Converter, which has specific preflop scenarios solved to a great degree of accuracy. I would use that in place of something like simple preflop in determining like the best preflop ranges for the specific game that I'm playing the most of. Whereas I would use Preflop Academy more like an exploration tool and a trainer to learn about all the different preflop scenarios that come up in a variety of games. So what I'm calling here, well, pretty much everything that I've listed here as a strength falls under that topic. Having a big database of tournament situations. I know they also do spin and goes or sit and goes, but I use it primarily for tournaments. And I think they have cash game ranges as well, actually. But just having a big library of unique situations means that you can learn more variations of the spots that you've maybe already practiced before. But also you can train very specific situations that come up very frequently. And this is a big, it's just call it a cornerstone of my approach, and I think the approach of the people who made Preflop Academy as well, which is that identifying the most common scenarios that you're playing and also the most impactful scenarios from an EV point of view is going to determine what your study should look like and where you should be spending the most time in that study. So I would use a program like this extremely often to reference the routine scenarios that I'm going to run into in game, and really just need like a quick answer. I don't need to set up a full simulation from scratch to solve this situation. I just need to refresh my memory on something that's relatively common. And Preflop Academy gives me a full library of all those spots in an app or in a browser that I can access from wherever I need to access it. Now, of course, there's weaknesses in the pre-solved or lookup tool environment, similar to post-flop concerns that I have. The pre-flop concerns of having fixed parameters are the same. I didn't get to choose what sizes they offer. I don't really have influence over what sizes they will offer in the future, although I'm sure they're always working on new simulations and they would respond to feedback. But basically, if there was a situation that I wanted to reference and it wasn't in this library, then I just have to make my own sim. There's no real customizability built into the program. So that is a limitation that we need to acknowledge. And it's the same as this pre-solved only note here, which is there's no ability to adapt the parameters and then rerun, or there's no built-in engine to let me change things and look at how that would affect the outcomes. I can only browse simulations that already exist in the library and then maybe compare those simulations to each other. Limited nodes is pretty much a weakness of any preflop simulation. I don't think that Preflop Academy has a particular weakness here, but I think just talking about the problem with preflop simulations in general, a lot of times in an effort to condense a very complicated situation, preflop solvers are eliminating options from the tree to make the calculation possible. So an example of this might be, very rare situations where 4 or 5 different players are putting in multiple raises are just completely removed from the simulation in an effort to keep things simpler. So if the answer you're looking for is, what am I supposed to do when I 3-bet from the cutoff and I face a cold 5-bet all in from the big blind and the first player calls? Like these situations probably don't exist in the database. They've been removed to allow a smaller tree size in the original calculation. And just the navigation, like the overlay of the program, isn't going to allow for you to just like keep clicking down the game tree until you get to this really specific situation. So I like to use these tools for routine situations, for common situations. Maybe occasionally I will look to see what it's going to say, facing cold 4-bet in this spot, and maybe it is in there. But the large volume of common situations is going to be way more useful to me than having really specific rare nodes available. And the other thing worth mentioning, just specific to Preflop Academy, is that the trainer is in beta. Again, this is at the time of recording. Perhaps by the course launch, it will be out of beta. But I have occasionally run into some problems with the trainer. Most notably, a lot of these simulations with restrictions like I was just describing, where parts of the tree are cut off or certain options are not allowed to make the tree more simple. Some of this has been uploaded to the trainer without, I don't want to say without editing, but let's say, for example, your original preflop sim did not allow for a small 3-bet squeeze off of 25 big blinds when it goes raise, call, and you're the 4th player into the pot or something. Like maybe for simplicity, that 4th player into the pot can only go all in. If you open the trainer and they just kind of randomly assign you a situation, they might occasionally assign you that situation where 3 players have already called and you're now the 4th player entering the pot. And because it's a trainer, it's going to say, would you like to fold or call or raise small or raise all in? Those options aren't just going to like disappear simply because the sim didn't offer them. And then maybe you choose one of those options, and then the trainer says, no, that's not that's not what you're supposed to do here. You only raise all in or you only fold. And that's not like because you made a mistake. That's because the simulation didn't allow that. So there's little things like that I've run into. I'm sure they're going to gradually improve on that. I know that they're working on it. But in the meantime, it's in beta. So you'll occasionally run into situations like that if you're using the program early. Now, when using a tool like this, and I'll show some examples shortly, the pitfalls that I commonly see players running into are no different from the pitfalls of using any preflop solution. And the number one problem that I have with people using preflop solutions is that they think that it's a chart to be memorized. rather than a concept to be understood. And memorizing the volume of charts that exists in a tool like this is going to be next to impossible. So I think that having that as your goal is misguided. And I don't want any of you to waste your time or your effort, most importantly, by aiming to learn one by one every range that a program like this has to offer. So just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, you can see that just under chip EV, just under the regular scenarios, which means that everyone at the table has the same stack size, just under raise first in, you're going to have a bunch of different sort of nuanced decisions, and you could look at the more detailed version here, or the simpler version. And learning the specifics of all of this, memorizing all of it, that is, could take an entire training session. And then you're now left learning the difference between how 12 and 15 big blinds plays from all of these positions. And then the nuances of learning them with or without limping. And then the nuances of learning how 30 big blind openers, uneven stack sizes affect the way that you're going to play opening ranges, but also responding to opening ranges. There's simply too much information in here to memorize. So the method that I encourage my students to use when approaching these preflop charts is to identify, like we did in the evaluation in this course, is to identify areas of weakness, generally speaking. So at a middle stack, facing RFI from in position, let's say from in position, and searching for a pattern in the difference between a small raise and an all-in raise. So let's say at those stack sizes where both are being used, trying to figure out the general pattern of playing in position with shoves and with small 3-bets. And by thinking of this as the problem that needs to be solved, we're addressing a large kind of mechanical concern instead of aiming to memorize. And we can use the vast amount of information that Preflop Academy or whatever tool has in their database by switching between button and cutoff and hijack pretty seamlessly, looking for where the all-in range starts to narrow or starts to widen, changing at the same time stack sizes, and everything stays the same, which I think is really helpful for these kind of exercises. Changing from shorter, looking at how all-in is going to change from shorter to deeper, and maybe even looking for just where the creators of the program have removed the all-in option because they found that it wasn't so useful anymore. This is not a flaw, right? This is someone who ran thousands of preflop sims, decided that at this point from these positions, you no longer needed the all-in. But maybe if the opener changes to cutoff, you need the all-in again. These types of things are mechanics that you can internalize through logic. And for me, that's so much easier than trying to remember, oh, right, ace queen offsuit was the one offsuit hand that jams for 30 big blinds, button versus cutoff. That doesn't help me at all. And that's something, even after making this video, is probably not going to stick with me longer than a couple of days. Now, the next pitfall that concerns me, I'm just calling ICM confusion. And this is perhaps something where I should talk briefly about how to take advantage of the ICM solutions that a program like this has included. So if you watch my regular training videos with Run It Once, you've probably seen me using this tool as a way of referencing how to approach final table situations. And that's pretty much what we have here. The only other program I'm aware of that offers a catalog like this is DTO. There's probably others. I just haven't used them personally. But both have a similar idea where you're looking at final table scenarios. Let's say here I've selected 8 max, so that means 8 players left at a final table. And the stack distribution is each row here. So you're choosing a different average stack sorted from small to large. choosing a different distribution. The chip leader is highlighted in red, the short stack is highlighted in aqua. And once you select it, you can see here the payouts, the percentages, the ICM value of everyone's stack. I believe the same payout or roughly the same payout has been used for all of these, although I haven't clicked on them individually to see if that's the case. But you can kind of get the idea that most variables here, payout wise, number of players at the table, average stack, are being held pretty consistent. And looking through the different variations here can help us understand some more general truths about the ICM model. So what I find this tool useful for is looking for what appears to be a similar situation to a final table spot that I've played previously, or similar situation to a concept that I'd like to understand better. And then trying to see if or why that situation that I played is different from the situation that's stored here in the tool. So there's a couple like handy things to try and parse all the information. You can click on anyone's position and it shows the different bubble factors and risk premiums. If you've used a tool before like ICMizer or HRC, I think these are familiar metrics. The risk premium just kind of going up as bubble factor goes up, and then it's different positionally. It shows the interaction between different players, how much they want to avoid busting or playing big pots against each other. So using that data and also just kind of your intuition for how different distributions of stacks might change your decision making, you can take into context things, again, like aiming for simple things personally, but take into context things like how opening ranges would change depending on how the stacks moved around at the table. Looking at how 3-betting ranges would change depending on where the chip leader is or whether or not they're still in the pot. Looking at how versus RFI would change depending on average stack, holding your stack constant. These are questions that you can try to answer just by comparing one sim to another. What I don't think you can do, and this is kind of the confusion pitfall, I don't think you can say, okay, everyone has 20 big blinds here at a 6-handed final table. I'm going to look at the raise first in ranges, and then I'm going to try to figure out, what's different about this from chip EV. Sure. Blockers are being raised more often. Something like an offsuit ace, a lot of these hands wouldn't be raised from the hijack, generally speaking. Pocket sevens gets open folded here from the hijack. So what can we take away from this? That sevens is not a good hand at a final table. That maybe we can't call a shove, so we just fold. It's kind of unclear to me what we take away from this. And within this sim, maybe we try to figure it out by, looking at the response versus RFI, say small blind versus hijack or something. Now we look at small blind versus hijack and we see pocket 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s are shoving, but 8s and 9s are folding. And now I don't really understand what was wrong with 7s in the first place, because certainly 7s against this range could consider raise calling. But again, maybe there's something that I don't understand about what's happening here, because perhaps the risk premiums are making it such that having 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s are not good enough, and all this ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4. Although my instincts are certainly telling me, like, hey, that seems like a lot of hands that 7s is way ahead of. Maybe I could open that hand. So now within this sim, I just kind of keep digging around and trying to figure out like what's going on. I can look at the button strategy versus the hijack open, and try to figure out what's going on with. It's a lot of funny stuff going on in general in these 20. This is a very nobody's ever played this scenario before, I'm assuming. Like if you've ever been 20 big blinds deep exactly with 5 different people at a final table, I'd love to hear about it. But here we are, like looking, for the answer to why I was supposed to open fold pocket sevens, perhaps. And it's hard to decipher. It's hard to get to any answers within this one sim. I don't, and this type of process reminds me very much of how I could easily get lost when I was first using PO Solver in the details of different blockers and the details of different betting hands that didn't make sense, or the details of different bluffs that didn't make sense. And it's just hard with one sim to open it up, try to answer one question, and actually find the answer to that question. So if we really want to get to the bottom of, why is pocket sevens open folding, we need to look at other sims. We need to continue, we need to find situations where sevens opens under ICM. We need to find situations where it's close. We need to find situations where it's a clear fold. We need to dig for other examples of that hand or that class of hand being played differently, so that we can contradict maybe some assumptions that we drew from this first simulation, or we can support the conclusions that we drew from this first simulation. So ICM confusion, I mean, just another application of more sims is better, especially when it comes to preflop. It's a very complicated part of the game. Using a lookup tool can be really dangerous, I think, because it makes me think that I need to pure fold 8s from the button against every hijack open at every final table. And that's just not true. It's true in this situation, perhaps. It's close to neutral EV in this case, so maybe depending on the table dynamic, it's not the only option. But there's nowhere near enough information here to learn general strategy about how to play final tables. So don't be discouraged looking at just one sim or 2 sims or 5 or 50, because it's probably not enough. You're just going to need to spend more and more time looking at different examples of ICM. It's one of the most complicated things I've tried to learn thus far in my poker career, for sure. And it's still finding ways to confuse me regularly. Now, these last couple of pitfalls might seem familiar from my recommendations on using trainers in other ways, and using these solutions in other ways, so I won't spend too much time on it. But just to reiterate what I think is a really important point, if you're going to use the trainer in Preflop Academy or in any program, don't just pop it open and get dealt a random spot and play because it feels fun or it feels good. Decide in advance what it is that you need to be working on. Plan your training session. Schedule it in a deliberate way, right? Like, we want to target our weaknesses. We want to have a plan for what we're trying to improve at. That's almost the whole reason that this course exists. So as easy as it is and as good as it feels to just sit down and fire up a trainer and tell ourselves like, oh yeah, great, I'm getting better. I mean, you're probably getting marginally better, but very, very slowly, very inefficiently. A little bit of advanced planning goes a long way here. And studying rare nodes, again, I talked about, I mean, some of them just don't even exist in the program. But spending them, if the majority of the time that you spend on a lookup tool is searching for, the cold 4-bet response to the in position 3-bet, you're probably using it incorrectly, because there's just no way that you're accurate enough at the stuff that really matters to your overall win rate, the routine spots. There's no way that you're strong enough in those situations not to be looking at them pretty much every single session. Some of the best players that I know or have ever worked with are every day writing down 10, 15 hands that they have no idea how to play and looking them up at the end of that session, or looking them up the next morning before they get ready for their following session. So that should just be part of your routine. It's very normal to look up a a hijack open off of 17 bigs. Like it's not weird if you don't know this chart exactly, right? Just look it up. Kind of skipped to my best practices advice before finishing the pitfall slide, but here we are. So this is an overview of all the stuff that I think is important when using a lookup tool or when using preflop ranges. Compare and contrast, right? Always go back, challenge the assumptions that you're making from one chart, look at a different chart and see if your conclusions make sense. You're trying to build long-term heuristics that make sense to you, that you can recall easily. And the only way to do that is to look at a whole lot of sims. And embrace boring spots is pretty much what I just finished talking about. It's the routine situations that we find ourselves in are mostly pre-flop. They're mostly very small pots, but they happen so frequently that they have the biggest impact on our win rate of any other spot. So if you don't know all these different, I'm mostly speaking to tournament players because there's so many pre-flop spots in tournaments, but even for 6 max cash, if you don't know your response to 3-bet, your response to 4-bet really, really accurately, then every couple, like, I don't know, 20, 30 hands, you're going to run into a spot where there's a small inaccuracy. And that builds up, hundreds of hands that it doesn't take a lot of effort to get more precise at. So I don't think that it's. What I'll say is that I'm surprised at how often my students are overly confident in their preflop game when there are pretty sizable improvements that they could make simply by looking at charts more often. So repetitive exposure is the antidote to this problem. It should be part of your everyday routine if you're a professional poker player to get better at preflop. It's too important not to be doing this on a regular basis. And training. I'm going to actually pull up the trainer page just to show you a little bit of the customization that I like to do on Preflop Academy. All right, so I do think I've shown this on a Run It Once video before, but I'll run through the options quickly. So there are 2 different ways that you can train, and I like this a lot because I strongly recommend to my students to make training as close to game-like as possible for them. So if you're a live player, playing one table with an extended period of time to play is a very reasonable approach. But if you're an online player who's typically multi-tabling, then having the option to multi-table with less time per answer is a lot more beneficial to you. And I think that fast training and also slow training both have their place for both live players and for online players. I don't think it has to be exact every single time, but customizing in a deliberate way is kind of matching the right type of training to the right type of learning goal, right? If I want to specify that I'm playing ICM spots only, then playing slower makes sense. ICM is going to be a final table. Even if you're an online player, final tables are going to happen. At the end of your session, you're going to be given more time bank. You're going to be playing that spot slower. You're going to be giving it a lot more focus. So playing 1 or maybe 2 tables, or using the deep study option on here, which allows you to train alongside looking at the way that the solution works. So as I make my decisions, it pops up. It shows the grid. I can take a second to study. This is good, I think, for final tables because you do want to allow your brain to process these in that slow, deliberate way. But if you're warming up for a session, I really prefer the faster method. Maybe with the exception of live players who are really just never moving that fast. But if you're if you're preparing for an online series and you're going to be 8 tabling, perhaps 12 tabling within 2 or 3 hours of starting, then warming up with some fast, you could even do 2 tables, but warming up with some really fast decisions to make is a nice way to prime yourself for that speed of thinking, right? So even if the decisions are relatively routine, not always routine. Oh, and this is mixing in final tables, which I should have turned that off. So that's on me for not filtering properly. Going back to chip EV only, I would do this fast warm up at chip EV only, and this is going to be a much better representation of how I would want to warm up. Yeah. So we're getting thrown a lot of different spots. You could even go so far as to filter specifically for the stack sizes that you're going to be playing at the start of that session. So you could run, like if you're someone who's a little more comfortable with short stack play, and when you get and when you start your session, you're going to be playing deeper stacks. Oh no. You're going to be playing deeper stacks, which is a situation you're less comfortable with overall. This might actually be that spot that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, eights might just be a fold. I'm going to stop distracting myself with this actual training. But the point is, at the beginning of your session, you're going to be playing a lot of deep stack play. Maybe you should filter your trainer for only playing 100 big blind stacks. You could add in 80, 70, 60, right? Now it's only going to give you the deep stack scenarios. Now you're getting ready for this situation you're about to put yourself into. Maybe it's not a playing day and you're just using the trainer in a way where you want to practice, like you've made a note from your study, from your evaluation. Oh, I'm really struggling against 3-bets. Oh, I'm really struggling against squeezes. I could look at 3-bet, verse 3-bet, and verse squeeze at these deeper stacks only, right? You could get even more specific if you want. You could set the positions. But doing this is really valuable. Now we're going into our trading session with a precise goal for what we're trying to get out of it. We're doing targeted reps towards that goal. And then once you're done, I kind of skipped over it, but once you finish the session, now you can go through, you can check the mistakes that you made. You can see how far off you were because you didn't realize you were playing a final table. You can see that I was only 1 pip off, losing 0.04, just a slightly ambitious call versus a 20 big blind shove. Yeah. Pretty size, even though it was only 1 pip off, somewhat sizable mistake there. And this type of review, they just really gave me the 1 pip every time, huh? This type of review is going to stick a lot better. So approaching it in this way, I think, is going to make a big difference in the efficacy of your pre-flop training. And also check out the other video on post-flop training. Not sure if it's before or after this one, but the video on post-flop training, I'm going to do more in-depth discussion of how to take advantage of these types of methods.